those of you who don't know me, I am John Crawshaw. I am the Director of Mental Health and Addiction Services here within the ministry, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to this place and to this seminar. Up until now, Sandy's been a disembodied voice on the end of a line, as we've been talking about. Becki, I met some time ago as we were first starting it, but let me formally introduce them. So Sandy Langfitt Russell is a Research Associate at and IPS National Trainer from the IPS Center in the United States. And for those of you in New Zealand who don't know, we are now part of the learning community across the world now. It's multiple places. And so we benefit from the shared knowledge that we will be hearing today. And Becki Priest has been around a wee bit in New Zealand a bit longer, actually making sure that the on-the-ground implementation happens. And currently you're based in Northland, is that right? So I think it's going to be quite exciting to hear some of the national and international experiences as we continue to progress what I regard as a really important piece of work in terms of actually not just making a difference to people's lives, but actually helping the people who access our services gain full employment and regain their lives. So, Sandy.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, everyone. I so appreciate being here and want to thank the ministry and Work Counts for sponsoring my trip here. As a part of the IPS Employment Center, the international learning community, such a huge part of that learning community is really and truly to learn how IPS works in other countries and other states. So it's not, it started off in the United States, but we've expanded now, and I'll talk some about that. But it's really the opportunity to learn from each other so that we can do a better job of promoting employment, increasing access to people so they have access to these employment services, and helping to build sustainability. So I'm going to talk some this afternoon about how we've been doing that, because it's crucial in order to get this model up and going. So there are four main points I wanted to talk about, and I think many of you already know this, but many people with serious mental illness want to work. We've done surveys, many surveys. I think there's 16 right now across all different kinds of work environments, where if asked if people wanted competitive jobs in the community, 60 to 70% of people said they did. So it didn't matter if it was at a VA, Veterans Administration Office, it didn't matter if it was a pre-vocational program, any other sort of employment program. So people were asked, do you want to work competitively? 60 to 70% said they did. We know that many people with mental illness do and can work. Our legacy, I was started in mental health in 1983, and at that time a lot of us didn't believe people could work, but we do know that people can and do want to work. So we're trying to change that paradigm so that all mental health clinicians and people are promoting employment and the belief that people can move on with their lives. IPS provides a roadmap for implementation, and you're hearing some about the fidelity that is being conducted. And that's so important because many employment models don't have the roadmap to telling people whether you're staying on course with implementation, or you're staying true to the model, or you're taking some wild detour and going off course, which happens. People will interpret things the way they want in their own belief systems, and so they may start doing things that aren't in line. And work is everybody's business. So it's not just up to the employment consultants or people providing employment to be thinking about employment for people. It's everybody's business, so that all of us should be helping people think about how to move on with their lives with education and employment, so that people can, as we know, become self-sufficient, independent, have a sense of purpose in their lives. So all those things are essential. Some of the key points for implementing the model is the staffing pattern, and so that's really important that we found. There's certain items you just need to have in place when you're implementing IPS. And so we know that you want to have, you here call people employment consultants, we usually say employment specialists, but the employment consultant and IPS supervisor. Typically, we like to think about having 2 employment specialists on a team because they're the only ones doing this job. And so it's good if you have at least 2 people that can talk to each other, cover each other, share job leads. And so it's nice if you can do that. That each employment consultant serve 20 or fewer people. We believe that's necessary because then they can maintain this focus on meeting with employers in the community. There's a very high expectation that a lot of time spent in the community, 68% of people's time, that's around 27 hours a week, should be spent in the community, meeting face-to-face with employers, meeting individuals in the community, helping them explore jobs. So it's a very intensive focus. They attend team meetings, so you want to leave enough time. In that employment education is the focus. So we make sure that with this role that the total focus of these individuals is on employment and education. We know through research that if you have people that do a shared employment and case management caseload, that employment gets moved to the back of the burner. So you want to keep employment, right up front at all times. And that the employment consultant is a generalist. So they're going to carry out all phases of employment. They don't hand somebody off. Like if you're uncomfortable with meeting with employers, and a lot of people are when they first take this job, it's not an easy job to go out and meet employers face to face and talk about hiring people. So sometimes people will hire what they call a marketing person, and you hand the person off to somebody else. And what do you think happens when you've built this relationship with somebody and you've worked with them and all of a sudden you say, go over here to somebody else? Many people drop out of services. So we don't want to have that happen. You've developed a relationship and you're going to carry it all the way through. So these are really key points. Also that the model is, and this is unusual for many employment programs, the model is embedded in the treatment team. It is a treatment-based program. So the model is embedded in the treatment team. It's an integrated treatment approach within mental health. And that's really essential to have that in place. And many employment programs don't necessarily do that. You'll have it detached. What we know is that when that happens, and I did a fidelity review last week, and this is a new model, this is a new program that just got started in June, and all the practitioners were telling us it has made this huge difference to us as practitioners to have the employment consultants there at our team meetings. They're visible, they're sharing the successes. Almost every single person, and we interviewed, I don't know how many RNs and OTs and managers of the teams, every single one of them said it shifted the culture of the team meeting. They said we used to be so focused on issues and problems and dealing with all of those, which is a part of what they need to be doing, but you've got this a huge percentage of people that aren't in crisis, and so you have the employment program helping to get people jobs, and that sharing those successes makes everybody feel better about their job. They were celebrating them. They had Fabulous Friday, Fab Friday, where they shared their successes, and it's just changed everything. And just watching people go to work that they never thought would go to work. I mean, honestly, it was just uplifting listening to all of them talk about, what the difference they're seeing in people's lives that they never thought could work competitively. So we know that, and you've probably heard this, but at this point, IPS has 25 randomized controlled trials, which is the gold standard for medical research. And these research studies have been done all over the world. This is not the United States alone. There was a very large one done in Europe with 6 different countries. I believe we have one from Australia. I don't know that I have the actual lineup here of where they've been conducted, but they're all over the world, and all of them show that the outcomes for IPS, the mean competitive rate is 56% compared to control, and that's 23. So often 2 to 3 times more effective if implemented with IPS as opposed to any other employment model. So the learning, I want to talk some about the learning community, and this is becoming a word that many people use now. But learning communities were first used by healthcare organizations, and it was a strategy that they used in order to help for increasing access to services or to the healthcare system. And so it was a strategy they used. And we, as part of our learning community, adapted it for IPS. And so the idea with the learning community, we call it now, is that you have shared goals and an agenda. So it's really important that when you think about, and this has been, so we have the international learning community, which is the IPS Employment Center, but many people, countries, Italy and the Netherlands and other countries doing this also have their own country's learning community. Or for me, I'm actually from Portland, Oregon in the United States. So the state of Oregon has its own learning community, and they kind of mimic a similar approach to the international. So they'll have an annual meeting every year. They get together as their steering committee. They have a shared agenda and goals. So it's all about, our outcomes, how well we're doing with our outcomes that they're sharing. How can we help people improve fidelity? How do we get access and funding for our services that are so important to continue to promote it? Again, you want the multidisciplinary teams at multiple sites, which can often be a challenge if that's not how your system exists. So the idea that you're helping to develop those teams in areas. So I know here, that employment is separate in some ways from the mental health, and so developing agreements in order to embed employment specialists into the teams. We have some states where that's true too, developing MOUs in order to do that. But working together to figure out how to make it possible. You want ownership among the members, so you want people to take responsibility and ownership for the results. You want to have face-to-face meetings. We found that that's really important within our learning community. That and I'll talk about it more later. But this is a meeting we hold once a year, and you would think it was some just this. Reunion. I mean, people are so happy, and I know people here have been there, that it's like when you get there, you're meeting with people with a shared mission, and everybody, it's so uplifting. People do not sit around and moan and cry about, people are just so jazzed and excited about talking about what's going on in their state and how they're expanding. And, as a matter of fact, a lot of times it becomes this issue because it's like, careful for what you wish for, because you wish so badly for expansion, and then all of a sudden the funding comes down. And we'll talk about this. It's happening all over the place, and it comes down, and all of a sudden you expand so quickly that we have teams within states that don't know what to do. So you have to plan for how do you scale out, when all of a sudden you go from having 3 or 4 or 5 teams to having 28 sites across the country or across the state. So it's exciting times, but you have to be thinking about, how will we deal with this when it happens? Data sharing is absolutely essential, and we do a lot of that, and you all will start entering your data into what we have as a web portal. So you'll be able to look across New Zealand and share outcomes across your sites if you want to. You'll be able to look at it. Site to site will not, unless you decide to do that. We're often very transparent in a lot of our states. We believe that sharing our outcomes helps people learn, and so we do that. In Oregon, we also share fidelity scores. We go down and share everything. So everybody sits at a steering committee and we share, and then people look at, like, if you're having trouble with this item or your outcomes are lower, how can we join you up with another site that can help you out? So, it's all about, this is really a group of people that are not competitive against each other. We're all trying to help each other to do better. That's our common mission. And there's the essential role of leadership. You really need those champions, those leaders that are going to continue to promote this during hard times, good times, but those people that, continue to talk about what it means for individuals to work, because employment, as you all know, is often low down when it comes to mental health services. Other things often, move it aside. So we want people that are constantly making a point about how people do better if they're actually working. I did hear somebody at the Fidelity review last week say to me, this individual got a job, and he said, this is a woman that used to call me every single day. She would call me with things going on in her life. And she got a job, and now she's not calling me anymore. She stopped calling me. And I was like, that's because she has a life. She's moved on beyond you now, and she has her own life. So that's what we want to see. We want to see people get a life. We want to see people with an exit plan so that eventually they can move on. So to go back just a bit and talk a little bit about the learning community, this all started around 2000 when Johnson & Johnson, which is, you may all be familiar with, Johnson & Johnson products. There's Johnson & Johnson Band-Aids and baby powder and on. They developed medical devices like the heart stent was developed by Johnson & Johnson. And then, of course, there's pharmaceutical. So Johnson & Johnson, though, was looking to give back. They have a separate arm of their corporation that's the nonprofit arm, and they gift money, and they gift a lot of money. I don't know how many millions of dollars they gift every year. A lot of it goes to Africa. A lot of it goes to Head Start. So there are a lot of different programs. They weren't giving anything to mental health, and they felt like they needed to give some money towards a program that would benefit mental health. They were pointed at that time to Dartmouth College, which is where the IPS Employment Center came out of. Dartmouth is who developed the model to begin with, and they were pointed towards Dartmouth by the National Association of Mental Illness, which is called NAMI in the United States. And NAMI said, in a consumer group, they're doing great work at Dartmouth, go over there and talk to them. So they came over and talked to the folks at Dartmouth, and they were impressed. So they started gifting money with no strings attached. It's just like, boom, here's this money for you each year, with the idea that you have to think about how you're going to expand this model. So think about what you're going to do to build and expand access to employment services. So so this was the mission, was to increase access. And what they determined to do in order to make that happen was to have states apply to them to become what we call the Johnson & Johnson state, IPS state. And the state would come to Dartmouth and fill out a one-page application. But they'd also have to have a partnership. And this is really important. So there needed to be a partnership between the state head of mental health, or whoever, and initially it's like whoever the director is at the state level for mental health or behavioral health, and the state level of vocational rehabilitation, which would be like your work and income department here. So whoever the director is of that. Those two needed to partner together to say, we are committed to this practice and helping to expand it, and we'll promote it. And a lot of the reason behind that is because, some of it is that you need that buy-in from leadership at that level in order to make it work. But it also helps to braid funding in the United States, because we found that not one source of funding will fund employment. You need multiple sources of funding. So we needed that partnership. And so that really helped the evolution of how the learning community started. And we'd only start like with 2 or 3 states each year. So we started off slow. We didn't invite a lot of people in. We just wanted to get it going in different states and make sure we had the capacity to bring people on. This is what it looked like in 2002. So it took 2 years to get things up and going, applications. So this was our learning community. And here I am out in Oregon. It was very lonely out there. A lot more people over in the east. Yeah, we had a champion in Oregon that just picked up this idea, and we had started to implement it. But he got a hold of Dartmouth and said, "We want to join." And they were like, "Oh, the Wild West, out in the frontier. We'll go out there." And
is that Indiana in the middle?
That's Kansas.
Kansas. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So we needed to have a structure and guidelines to it. And so this when we came to the States, and so what we said to them is, we want 2 tiers. We also want you not only to have these partners, but we want you to have a state trainer. There needs to be a trainer to help these sites get up and going. They're not going to do it on their own without technical assistance and consultation. So the two-tiered was, at that time, we at Dartmouth would have a trainer like myself, and then you have the state trainer, and we would do a train-the-trainer approach. So I would go in and do some training with a person, whatever state that was. I spent a lot of time in Kentucky, which I loved, with Lori Norton, who was the trainer, and so we did some fidelity reviews. I trained her. I watched her do it. I'd fade out. She'd take over. You know, so we did a lot of that, back and forth, technical assistance, trainings. So that was a part of the two-tier. And again, developing state champions, memorandums of understanding, so that within the states, we needed to see that happen. Between you know, vocational rehabilitation often, and mental health, or the sites themselves in an agreement. Developing funding plan, that is always, it's very, very complicated to figure out the funding process, but we did help each state think about how can you fund this model. We actually broke out every item that you could possibly do as a part of IPS and figured out who would be funding this piece. Who funds developing a career profile? Who funds job development? Who funds long-term support? So how do you fund this to make it work? Creating training capacity. So one trainer, Lori, I mean, I think they have 26 sites now. So Lori, as one trainer, can no longer do that. So how do you add trainers as you start to, you know, build this capacity again and start to expand? Tracking simple outcomes. I think I've talked some about this. So we track them from site level. When I was a trainer, I was actually a trainer in Oregon too. When we'd meet with the site, we'd bring that in and talk to the executive director. Let's look at how your outcomes are going, where you're doing really well. So that's, keep promoting that. The annual meeting we talked about. So these annual meetings where you have the face-to-face contact, where there's a celebration. Bringing in stakeholders really helps to do that. We have conference calls initially every month with new states. I think here are we doing quarterly with you all, or every 2 months? Yeah, every 2 months. In a commitment, and this is the thing that I think people, when they get into a learning community, somehow think maybe we're going to be telling people what to do, or I'm not sure what people think. I worry about it sometimes. But it's really a commitment to learning and research. So we really want to hear what you're learning, because that's how we learn. So it really and truly is opportunity. And everything we have, you know, our materials are all free. I mean, we don't charge for anything other than our manuals. So it's like we're sharing as much knowledge and information and research as we can to get it out there to everybody. So some of the guidelines here for starting off is to start small with 3 or 5 sites. And I'm not sure what you're at now. I keep losing track. How many sites?
About 5, 7. I mean, if
Yeah.
we talk about DHB, 7 DHB.
Yeah, 7 DHB
Yeah.
expanding.
Yeah. So you start small, and then you have the trainer. You've got that in place. You got a lot in place already. I've got to tell you, you've got a lot going on here that's good. You know, a commitment to fidelity reviews. So sometimes we would have sites, and all of a sudden we go into train or something. They're like, "What are you doing here?" I mean, you really want to make sure that from the get-go, you know, they understand this is something that you're committing yourself to. You're committing yourself to having a trainer on site. You're committing yourself to having a fidelity review, a baseline at 6 months, and one annually until you reach good fidelity, or every 6 months until you reach good fidelity. Development of educational materials, a website which you launched 2 weeks ago. Yeah, it's really nice if you haven't visited it yet. It's a lovely website. And the replicating, which I already talked about. It's that idea that at a local level you want to replicate what's going on at an international level. Water. These are quarterly outcomes where we started. In 2002, with 4 states, and so you can see how many people receive services. in the competitive employment rate, and then you come down to 2018. So we've gone up to 8,433 workers. So you can see how it's expanding. And there was a very difficult time, we went through with the recession. This is based on, this is based on the United States statistics that we're pulling off those outcomes that people are sending into us. So, you can see how the expansion is starting to take hold. And the interesting thing is we've also done a sustainability study, and we've lost very few sites over the years since we started. Very few sites have dropped out or stopped providing services. And this just shows the graph that we do with the outcomes, so people can see how many people are working in percentage.
They're a snapshot in time outcomes, aren't they? They're a different measure to the randomized control trials. So they're a snapshot in time.
This is from our quarterly outcomes that we're collecting from our sites right now from the web portal. Yeah. So, and this just, again, just shows you how it's expanded. So now that we're up to 24 states, we just invited Alaska in, which is a very interesting, that's some place to learn from a lot. I work, there's some in Homer, Alaska, which is a village, tiny village, and it's a fishing village. So during the winter, everything shuts down because it's freezing. So, watching them implement IPS and seeing their success rate is amazing. And then our international community. So we have Italy now, Montreal just came in recently, Netherlands, New Zealand, and Spain. So in Europe, they're starting their own learning community within their countries, gathering together. So that shows it now, and I apologize, I haven't gotten Alaska there yet or Montreal, but you can see now, I don't feel as lonely. I'd like one more state so I have a bridge all the way across where I am, but we're getting close.
Wow.
Although I got to tell you, I'm not so sure about Nevada or Idaho. This was a study we did. We're constantly doing studies, and we may pull you in to help out, constantly pulling information to figure out how does this work. People wanted to know, does fidelity make a difference? Does fidelity make any difference in outcomes? And so we had the sites, we asked sites to volunteer, and they turned in their fidelity report, and then they turned in their outcome report so we could do a comparison. And as you can see, the higher the fidelity, the better the outcomes. So it was we could collaborate that fidelity resulted in better outcomes. And we're also starting to expand to new populations. So these are all people now coming to us and saying, well, if it can work in mental health, why can't it work with autism? So the partnership, again, and we've been through this, but just summarizes. And I can tell you this partnership at the country or state level has just made such a difference. And I'm very proud to say in Oregon, there was quite a push at a leadership level, and that was from a consumer group and NAMI to push them to get our legislation to mandate IPS as a core service at the mental health agencies. And so they did that, and the Department of Mental Health at that point has said all the IPS, all the mental health programs need to offer that for people that want employment services. Therefore, the funding flowed that direction towards the programs. So that has caused a statewide expansion. I mean, there isn't a place in Oregon right now that isn't providing IPS. And we have so many more people that have the services now than used to have them. And a lot of that was done, because we had leadership. Our governor said, I want to only fund programs that have research and outcomes based upon it. If you can't show me outcomes based upon the services you're providing, why do I want to pay for them if I don't know if they work or not? I mean, we know this works. So I think we've been through this, the funding, the training, tracking outcomes, monitoring, fidelity, efficacy, employability. And this is what people say, which I think is the most important thing in the world. I think this is more important than anything else we can do, is listen to the people receiving the services. Those are the people that speak the loudest. And over and over and over again, this is what we hear. So that's it. I hope I kept you 20 minutes to go over. I did. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandy. That was really fantastic. I'm here now to talk about IPS and implementation support in New Zealand. And I guess from a personal perspective, I feel very privileged to talk about this. I've had a 20-something year experience of working in mental health, and I came across IPS about 10 years ago, kind of by accident, when my own vocational services was put out to tender on the recommendation of a person who may or may not be in the room, who was suggesting that IPS was the way to go in England. And I didn't think that that was true. It turned out that our service lost that tender. I eventually got over that sadness, and a local NGO was given the tender to provide IPS services, and I can tell you within a year, I was completely wrong. I've never seen anything transform people's lives in the way that I've seen IPS transform people's lives. So much so that I've spent 10 years becoming as much of an expert as I can in this. And I've had the real pleasure to be out in America as well as work across Europe, and listen to the fantastic Warren Elwin when he invited me here for a year contract in 2015. Honestly, it will just be a year. So I'm going to touch on a little bit about the history of IPS implementation in New Zealand, talk about an example of implementation support where we added in implementation support to existing mental health and employment services in Auckland. Then I'm going to give an example of implementation support for a new startup service in Northland, and talk about critical success factors for New Zealand. So I'm going to try and cram all that into 20 minutes. First of all, IPS services in New Zealand. So the black dots kind of mark the spot. IPS has pretty much been available for around about 10 years now. Warren and Workwise being early adopters of IPS, established sites, and they have grown over the years. More recently, probably in the last sort of 6 to 12 months, has seen more providers adopt IPS. So there are Northland up at the top, so that's a DHB provided service. There is Te Aramahi, who are a local NGO provider in Blenheim, and coming further down, Christchurch is provided by Odyssey, and down in Southland, not quite sure who the provider is, but they're about to launch a new IPS service. In terms of implementation, both Helen and Warren have championed that for a long time before they actually got the money back in 2015 to get some implementation support. But our implementation journey as a country began in 2015, and I was very privileged to be asked to come and provide that implementation support. It was provided through employment support services that were Workwise, that have been well established in Counties Manukau and Auckland DHB for between 8 and 10 years, so 2 different sites. The DHB was purchasing through Workwise IPS services. Clinical services were provided through 5 community mental health centres in ADHB that included Lotte Folio, dedicated Pacifica mental health service, and 4 in Counties Manukau. So the addition of implementation support initially for the year period began with a fidelity review, so looked at how faithful the mental health and the employment services were to IPS provision. You can see the scores here, slightly different for each of the areas. The most important thing you do with a review, though, is actually engage everybody involved in a review about why you're doing a review. And this is one of the few things, as Sandy said, that actually if you increase your score on this, more people would get a job. So people have a buy-in to this approach that they don't necessarily have to other things you might measure within health because of the direct correlation to improved patient outcomes. Created a partnership improvement plan that was across the health services and the employment services, and over the 12 months, fidelity improved, which is great. But why would you do that? So in terms of referrals, over the 12 months, we found that referrals more than tripled. This is going out and talking to people about the importance of employment as a health intervention and talking about referring anybody. And interestingly, as implementation support, you often, when you talk about referring anybody, will get somebody to go, aha, but what about this person? And in one of the Auckland sites, that person was a lady who was 64 who hadn't left her house for a number of years, occasionally would walk to the shop, chain smoked, lived with her cat, had a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder, and the people in her community would have known that she was mentally unwell and kind of steered clear of her. So she was the person that said that she wanted a job. So when I kind of went employment for everybody, she was the person that was referred to us. So the employment consultant came to me and said, what do I do now? So what we did was work with her over quite a long period and actually discovered that despite the fact she'd been in multiple institutions and been told that she'd never work, she'd ignored them, and she'd taken herself off and got herself a qualification in audio typing at the local college. So we actually enabled her to work from home as an audio typist. So she continues to work now, and her mental well-being has improved in a way that the psychiatrist said I haven't seen for about 20 years. Because now when they have a conversation around why might you take the medication, well, we need you to take that because we think you'll be more productive for your job. And she can actually see that correlation, and she knows that she can get more work done. And once you've got a story like that and an outcome like that, then comes 3 times more referrals. The employment specialists started working with more people over the time period. So the referrals, when somebody's referred to an IPS service, a clinician will have a conversation going, do you want a job? The next thing that happens is the employment consultant from the IPS service meets with the person to describe what the service can offer them and to see if the person wants us. So the power is given back to the individual to make the decision. So actually looking at an accepted referral is something that's really important because that means that the person is saying that they want our service. I guess one of the key things that change through implementation support is the attitudes also change. So this is one of the managers from ADHB who was interviewed as part of a review of the pilot to talk about how has implementation support changed. And she's being really reflective here and talking about the fact that people acknowledge the fact that it was the clinicians that were getting in the way of people starting work, and that actually we don't have ownership over that. And that's often for numerous different reasons. It can be born out of the best wishes of a person for the individual, can be born out of the fact that I thought putting somebody on lots of training courses first was a really great idea, or just not being aware. So challenging some of that and changing some of that dynamic is really important. Some of the outcomes for individuals, 40 to 50% of people that accepted the service went on to obtain competitive jobs. People secured jobs on average between 2 and 4 months after referral. So people are helped into work and are helped into work quickly. They're not made to wait around for a long time. More than 3/4 secured job at 16 hours or more per week. And the average wage, this was done a little while ago, was between $18 and $18.50. So more than the minimum wage at the time. To talk about the Northland story. Back 12 months ago, Northland were successful in a joint bid between them and Northland Police to create Te Ara Oranga, which is the path to wellness, and it's a methamphetamine harm reduction pilot. And I'd kind of heard about this, and it was actually during one of the reviews that I did in counties that I'd heard that Northland were thinking about doing this. And one of the people that we met during the review was somebody who used the services. And he was telling his story about being street homeless and being in gangs and being addicted to meth and having a psychosis and having lots of other issues, and how employment saved him. And I said, oh, can I just ask you a few questions? Slightly off topic, but I've heard that they're going to set up a methamphetamine harm reduction pilot, and my heart tells me that we should have employment as part of this. But I'm just not sure because I'm from England and methamphetamine isn't a big thing over there, and what do you think? And he said, man, those people that I live with on the streets have got more skills than you can actually imagine. You will be surprised if you set up an employment support program. I think that you should absolutely go for it. So yay to him, thank you very much. I then went back and said, let's do employment support. We knew right away from the start that getting the right support to do employment support in an area like Northland was really important. So Work Council supported us to think about how we could set up the project as well as delivering the project. Choosing the right staff was really important. I would not be as good at delivering, I don't think, employment support as the people that we've got. It was very important to us to have people that were connected to the local community, who knew the community, and the two people that we've got are actually generationally from that community. So not only do they know every single job that's going, everybody knows who they are as well, and that opens doors in a completely different way. Paying a real attention to culture. Northland has a very big Māori population, and because IPS is from the States, there were a few questions around how that could fit within a cultural context. So one of the things we deliberately set out to do with the employment project is measure ethnicity at different points. So we measure ethnicity at the point of referral to make sure that there isn't any inadvertent screening from the clinical team. We then measure ethnicity at the point where the person accepts our service. To make sure that our whanaungatanga and our engagement of people is done in the right way. And we then also measure ethnicity at the point of outcome. So how many people who are referred and accepted our service actually get an outcome from the service to make sure that it's equitable. We also had cultural representatives in the setup and establishment of the programme, as well as in the interviews. We created Employment Works, which is the name of our employment programme. And we had, similar to how Sandy was talking, establishment plans, clinical champions, got some really good early adoption. We had a fidelity review at 6 months, and we've recently had our 12-month review. And we look at continuous service improvement. How can we build on what we've got? So just to quickly touch on Northland, for any of you that aren't aware of the Northland population, around about 171,000, 50% urbanised. We're actually booking the trend for the whole of the world, apparently, in the fact that we're becoming more rural, where the rest of the world is becoming more urban. So most people live in the middle of nowhere, and a lot of people live in the middle of nowhere with nothing. So what you're seeing in the sort of pinks and reds is the New Zealand Deprivation Index. The dark reds and oranges and peachy colours are the most deprived areas. So huge swathes of Northland are deprived. The Deprivation Index is measured on things like income, home ownership, employment, qualifications. Over half the people we work with don't have a car, don't have a phone, don't have access to the internet. It's not unusual for us to be working with people who don't have water. For me, coming from Europe, that was absolutely shocking that I come to a country like New Zealand and there isn't any water anyway. So employment support here is quite tricky. The unemployment rate is higher than the national average, and industries are lower. So the characteristics of the people that have engaged with our service, around about half and half, male and female. Average age is sort of 36. This is kind of about what you would expect for most IPS programs. 49% Māori and 51% non-Māori, and that tracks all the way through. So at outcome phase, half and half, of the people in terms of ethnicity are getting results. So we know that people accessing our programme are getting the right outcomes that they need. We knew when we set up the programme that we couldn't say it's for you and not you. So it was funded by a methamphetamine harm reduction pilot, and it is part of a meth pilot, but 40% of the people that access our pilot have got a primary diagnosis of addiction, and the rest have a primary diagnosis of mental health. So that includes schizophrenia, bipolar, all of the kind of mental health conditions that you would expect in a specialist mental health service. So basically, if somebody walks through the door of the mental health and addiction team and says that they want a job, we help. Of the 60% of people with mental health problems, 44% of them have got addiction problems. So, which is the reason that we just said anybody, because we know that addiction is so much of a big problem in Northland, that if you go, you've got to have an addiction, most people will tell you that they haven't, despite the fact that they're coming in and they look like they've been using within the last few hours. It's completely open access. Over half the people we work with have got criminal convictions. So some people it might be a one-off criminal conviction that some people might go, oh, it's quite a light or a low criminal conviction. But if that's drink driving or drug driving, that is a massive problem in Northland because they can't get anywhere because they haven't got transport to get to a job. Other people have got convictions. Highest qualifications, so nearly half the people that we work with have got no kind of qualifications at all. 25% have got school leavers, a few have got trade, and some have got higher qualifications. Length of time since last employed. A small number of people have been employed in the last 6 months. These are all characteristics that are known to make it more difficult to help somebody into work. More than 52% of people haven't worked at all in the last year, and 21% of people accessing our service have never worked. So, because of all those demographics that I've just talked about, when I said, let's set up employment support here, people said, what a great idea, but there aren't any jobs. And are you sure you know Northland to suggest that? But actually, the provision of evidence-based supported employment is particularly critical in an area like Northland. We should be giving them more, not less. You know, and there are lots of other areas of New Zealand that are as deprived. People in those areas are particularly vulnerable to continued unemployment. Now, I don't know, I might just have to come out of this. So, nothing better than hearing from somebody that's actually used our service. So this.
A year ago, wouldn't have thought of having a job or getting to work in a vehicle. Now, it's a great feeling. I'm getting more independent every day.
Maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I first met Les. He came to us presenting with multiple mental health issues. So we planted the seed with Leslie about what are your options outside home. And he agreed to be referred to an employment specialist, so yeah, that's where it all started for him.
When I first met with Daphne, we did a CV, and yeah, she got me the job that I wanted. So I've always wanted to do it. When I was young, I used to see people getting like pick up the rubbish, and I was like, I want to do that one day. And now I'm doing it. She got me to the Kaipara Refuge Centre, and we had like a few meet and greets. After that, I had a few work trials, and it all went from there.
About 6 months ago, Daphne called in at work on the off chance that we may have a job. She said she had a guy at Tinapai that was looking for some work, and his job he would like to do would be on the rubbish trucks. And as it turned out, we were looking for somebody, and I asked Daphne to bring Les in to meet, and it's just gone from there.
The IPS model has been introduced to Dargaville through an initiative under Te Ara Oranga, a joint initiative with the Northland District Health Board and the New Zealand Police. The beauty of the IPS model is that we work with small caseloads, so following the IPS model, trying to work with around about 20 clients as a maximum. which gives us ample time to offer dedicated service to the job seekers that we work with.
You get to know their clients, you get to work with them, identify what they're good at, what they like doing, and it's a very individual process that we're working with.
It's made a huge difference actually to our clients' mental well-being and their confidence, their self-esteem, and just that sense of normality really. We're not only just looking after clients' mental well-being, we're also supporting them to actually live a normal life, go to work, earn money, bring money home for their families, and just to enjoy their life a little bit better.
I started training about 3 weeks ago. Yeah, so I've lost 2 kg so far, so yeah, I'm pretty happy. Work helped get me the bag, and yeah, with working that made my mind feel better too, and once I train more I'll feel even more better. Yeah.
It's given him more confidence, made him more independent. And I think yeah, he's made our family very, very happy.
We've had the employment specialist service here now for 14 months, and at the 12-month stage we had 70 referrals, of which 44% are now in paid employment, so that's a wonderful outcome.
Since Les has been involved with the program, you can't help but notice how he's sort of developed a greater confidence in himself. He's more willing to engage in conversations, he's presents himself a lot better. He's got a smile on his face, and that's always nice. Yeah.
And I guess just to say, that was a little while ago now. Les, his primary goal for being in work is to lose weight, and he's now lost 20 kg. He's no longer taking statins for his cholesterol. His risk of heart attack has dropped dramatically. He's had a multitude of health benefits, including the fact that he now walks into the office with the biggest grin on his face and will look at you eye to eye and will greet you in a way where he was just one of the most deflated people when you first saw him, and would look at the floor and wouldn't even talk to you. And actually his nurse who you saw on there, Jeff, when he referred him, said, good luck with this guy. I don't think you'll find him work. And to be honest, without IPS, I don't think he would have worked. And he'd been trying to work for about 15 years unsuccessfully, going in and out of jobs or applying for jobs and not being successful, trying voluntary work and then not being paid and not being fulfilled by that. We feel really fortunate. 40% of our participants have commenced paid employment, so that's nearly 30 people now. We've got over 30-something jobs. Often people will come to us and go, people are desperate. I really want to work and I really want to earn some money, and they want a now job to earn some cash while they look for the job that they actually want to be on and the trajectory that they want to be on. So for some people they might come and do Kumara picking because they're always looking for people to do that job because it's a really hard job and not many people like to stick at it. So they might do that for a few weeks while we're actually finding them a job that matches their skills and experience. So we have got quite a few people in a number of different jobs. 63% of people commence paid employment or vocational outcomes. So there's a number of people that will come to us that want to be a painter or a bricklayer or a lorry driver and haven't got the qualifications to do that. So we support them through that as well as getting into a job afterwards. As I said before, approximately half our participants who commenced employment identify as Māori, so we're making sure there's equitable outcomes. Most people worked around 33 hours a week, and our average earnings are quite high. $613 a week is actually quite high, and we make sure that we're helping people into jobs that lift them out of poverty. And I guess just to finish up, I know that we're probably right on time now. So critical factors for successful implementation in New Zealand. Implementation support improves quality and quicker adoption of practices. I know that having implementation support in Northland meant we got there a lot faster than we would have done otherwise. and also provided a really high quality service to people. We needed to pay attention to culture to ensure equity of outcomes, and in Northland we've done that throughout, and we are starting a discussion around how we can match some more cultural input with IPS to make it more successful, and that policy needs to support our practice and provide contracts that allow for IPS to flourish. We're very lucky in Northland to have a contract that said do IPS, so we did IPS. Not all contracts are that supportive. So that's me, thank you.